Well, good afternoon, men. How's everybody doing today? Good. Phil, I want to say thank you to you for our almost lifelong friendship. And we have been doing things with each other and to each other and next to each other for many, many decades now. And Phil is a dear and a wonderful friend. I also want to let you know, I want to recognize we have Man in the Mirror has an area director that helps churches disciple men more effectively. We have them in maybe 35 states, about 65 men. And one of them is here with us today at lunch, Jonathan Murray. So Jonathan, maybe you just stand up and raise your hand. And thank you, Jonathan, for being there. And I wasn't really planning to give an advertisement, but I mean, if you have a church and you want to disciple men more effectively, you might want to check out that with Jonathan, either on our website or with him personally. So there was this man in Chicago who had a business trip to Orlando, where I live, in the middle of the summer. So he booked his business hotel in Orlando for the beginning of the week, and then he remembered that he and his wife had not been on a holiday for quite some time. So he asked her, and she said yes, and was able to then book a hotel down in the resort area at the end of the week. Came down to Orlando, finished up his business a day early, and wondered if I can get into the resort hotel a day early, and he was able to do that. So he moved down there, and then he realized his wife didn't know where he was. His phone had died, so he went down to the business center to send her an email. Unfortunately, he got two of the digits mixed up, and so instead of sending an email to his wife in Chicago, he actually sent an email to a woman in Detroit whose husband had just died. So the family had been at the funeral parlor. They came home. The family went into the kitchen. The widow went into her bedroom, booted up her computer to see what kinds of emails of condolence might have arrived. She let out a shriek, passed out on the floor. The family rushed in, and there on the computer screen was this message: "Dear wife, I arrived yesterday afternoon, and I'm starting to get settled in. Preparing for your arrival tomorrow afternoon. P.S. It's really hot down here." Isn't it interesting how what seem like relatively small errors can lead to sometimes very large responses and consequences? So I want to tell you a story, all right? And this story starts in 1926, so it sounds like it's going to be a long story, but it's not. In 1926, when my father was 2 years of age, the youngest of 4 children, his father abandoned the family. So my dad grew up in a fatherless home. They were extremely poor. They lived in Albert Lea, Minnesota. My grandmother had a couple of sisters who lived in town, and so they moved in with these 3 women, then basically raised my dad and his 3 older siblings. But they were extremely poor. My Aunt Nina was an elevator operator at the Freeborn National Bank in downtown Albert Lea, where they paid her what would be the equivalent of about $15 an hour today. So way overpaid her. But that was before there were social programs. And in those days, the communities closed ranks around their poor. So, for example, every day, Nina would go by the grocery store, and she had an arrangement with the grocer. Nina, you take whatever you need and pay whatever you can. That's how it worked. My dad went to work when he was 6 years old. He had 2 jobs. My father, had 2 jobs at the age of 6. he would get up with his older brother, Harry, every day at 3 a.m. They would work on a bread truck, and then they had a paper route. The school had given them a permanent tardy slip to help out this young, struggling family. And then my dad became a man. But what it meant to be a man was completely unexampled to him. He had never felt the scratch of his father's whiskers. He had never heard his father reading him a bedtime story. He had never tossed a ball in the backyard, never had his hair tousled, never wrestled on the ground with his dad, never heard a truck door in the driveway shut at the end of the day, signaling that his father was about to re-enter the family orbit. And so my dad was in the position that he basically had to guess at how to be a husband to my mother and a father to myself and 3 younger brothers. And he did the best that he could. Somewhere along the line, my dad realized that he needed help, and he looked to the one place in the world that a man should be able to look to find that kind of help. One day, my dad got us all dressed up, and we walked up to the front door of a church, and my dad reached out for the handle of the church door. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to pause there and think about what a golden moment that is. If you would just for a moment imagine all the mothers, the grandmothers, the aunties that had been praying, who knows, sometimes for decades, that these young men, that they would find their way to church, to a place where they could get some help on how to be godly men, godly husbands, godly fathers. And then, if you would, think about all of the different ways that God has been sovereignly orchestrating the events of that young guy's life, my dad, to bring him to that place, to that front door. And then, if you would, think about all the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms that are doing everything possible to prevent that from happening. And then finally, think about how much courage my dad would have had to screw up to humble himself and walk up to the front door of that church and basically say, I have a problem and I need your help. And then my dad opened the front door of the church. The church I grew up in did not have a vision for making disciples. The church that I grew up in had a vision for doing the work of the church, and there's lots of work, and we need more workers, not fewer. But Jesus did not say, go and make workers, browbeating them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But I think a lot of times it seems like, oh man, they want my labor, you know. He did not say, make workers and pray that somehow someone might possibly become a disciple, you know. It was make disciples and pray for workers, not the other way around. But in my church, that seemingly small error, getting those two things mixed up, led to a devastating result in my family. A devastating result in my family. My dad had an incredible work ethic. You might imagine that, having been at work since he was 6 years of age. And so my dad was there for all the right reasons. He needed help. And he was a sweet, humble guy. And they learned that he was a worker, so they put him to work. And I guess that my dad thought, well, I guess this is what it means to be a good Christian. And so he responded. By the time my dad was 40 years of age, he was the top layman in the church. 40. But he just got burned out. In other words, he didn't have enough Jesus for himself, much less any left over to give away to anybody else. So he was running on fumes for a decade, I guess. And so we left the church. I was in the 10th grade. My youngest brother was in the 3rd grade. And it was a devastating decision. And if my dad was here still, he would say, I take full responsibility for what happened to my family. And you got to love that. You wish more men would say, I'm responsible. But here's what happened. I quit high school in the middle of my senior year. I mean, the wheels started coming off the wagon immediately. I quit high school in the middle of my senior year. My next brother followed in my footsteps. He eventually died of a heroin overdose. My next brother never held a job for more than 6 months until he was 50 years of age and became a Christian. And my youngest brother is a recovering alcoholic, divorced, and a hermit, like a technical hermit. He has a job, but he's technically a hermit. And my dad just never saw it coming. I know that if he had seen that, the consequences of not being part of a disciple-making church and even knew what it was, if he had seen the consequences, he would have taken a different direction. If he could have seen around the edge of that, the end of, around the building, around the corner of that building, he would have taken a different way. And so then I come along. And I meet Patsy, my wife, 48 years, 3 months, and 17 days. We've been married. And I love her more today than the day we got married, and I loved her a lot then. I'll just be honest. I didn't know what it meant to be a man. I didn't know what it meant to be a husband. I didn't know what it meant to be a father. You can't give what you don't have. And so my dad, he was a great man in so many ways, but you can't give what you don't have. And so I was left to guess myself. And then one day I woke up and I had adopted as my life philosophy that money will solve my problems and success will make me happy. And I guess it was because the economy was good, but I was meeting all of my goals. And I don't know about you, but what I have found is that met goals tend to become an unrelated string of hollow victories, increasingly frustrating as more and more is accomplished. And I just hated my life. You know, you set a goal, and then what do? You work real hard, 6 months go by, you meet the goal, euphoria, 2 weeks pass, novelty wears off, have to do what? Set a new goal, right? New goal has to be what? Bigger, brighter, faster, higher, shinier. Work real hard, 6 months pass, meet goal, euphoria, 2 weeks later, novelty wears off, have to set a new goal. And I just found that to be this incredibly, the angst that I felt, the sense of meaningless. Solomon said meaningless, vanity, meaningless, everything is meaningless. Man, I hated my life. Solomon said in one of the chapters of Ecclesiastes, after he talked about all this, he said, so I hated my life. And I read those words the first time. I said, that's me, I hate my life. So success is, one definition is getting what you want, but I think that's great. I think failure would then be to not get what you want, right? I think another way of defining failure would be, though, to say that failure means to get what you want only to find out that it doesn't really matter. Get exactly what you want only to find out it doesn't really matter. And that was me. So I was taking my frustrations out on Patsy, my wife. I just thought if I could form the words on the tip of my tongue to sort of expiate this angst, this amorphous pain that was eating away at my gut, if I could just articulate that, if I could get it out, that somehow I would get rid of this inner turmoil. And so I was saying things to her that, a man really should not say to a woman, ever. And this particular day, and it wasn't the first time, I guess, but this particular day, I looked over, and she had these big tears rolling down her face, and when I looked at her, she was looking at me, and I was transfixed. I couldn't look away. I tried to look away. I couldn't look away. And after what seemed like a brief eternity, she asked this question. She said, Pat, is there anything about me that you like? Well, I felt like I'd just been tasered. And I remember wandering off to the office and thinking to myself, Morley, what happened to you? You wanted your life to count, to make a difference, to do something, but you're just a nobody headed nowhere. And it was true. So I went to the office and stared out the window for the rest of the morning, and I realized that I needed help, just like my dad had realized in a different way that he needed help. And so I had grown up in the church. At that point, I was de-churched. That's one of the big things going on now with young guys. I went through a period of being de-churched. Maybe some of you went through a period of being de-churched too. One morning, not long after that incident, I said to my wife, why don't we go to church this morning? And after the smelling salts revived her, we walked up the sidewalk to a little Methodist church, and I reached out my hand for the door handle of that church. That golden moment. All of the effort and all of the energy and all the whatever that had gone into bring that moment to pass, and all the efforts to keep it from coming to pass. And when I touched that door handle and opened it up, they were so ready for me. Oh gosh. They were so ready for me. So when and this could be a conversation you have with an Uber driver, or this could be a conversation you have with a coworker over lunch, or this could be something that is happening at your church or in your neighborhood or your rec center or at your gym or just about anywhere else in the world, and maybe even the Harvard Center. These are questions that are worth asking. When I reached out for that front door handle of that church, or when a younger guy says, I'm having some things I just need somebody to talk to. I wonder if you'd be willing to talk to me. There are 4 questions that are so powerful they can release all of the latent energy of the gospel. You see, discipleship is God's designated way to release the power of his gospel on every problem men face. It doesn't make any difference whether a man got into his current situation because of financial irresponsibility, moral irresponsibility, or just general confusion, or a lack of mentoring, or growing up in the wrong family, or not having a father figure, or being a racist, or whatever it is. It doesn't make any difference how a man got into his current situation. The only solution is to disciple them out. And so, there are 4 questions that are worth asking. When a young man reaches out to me, or I see a young man in distress, or any man in distress, or any man reaching out, but he's reaching out, in my case, reaching out for the front door handle of the church, or my dad reaching out for the front door handle of the church. Why didn't he just do that? Why did he just do that? What are the problems that he's trying to solve? What does he need from us? What does he need from me? And how can we give it to him? And so when I opened the church door that morning, there were some covert black ops special forces commandos, and man, they in their tack gear and Kevlar, and they were all over me, man. They knew exactly why I was there. Well, not exactly looked like that, but that's exactly what they were. In reality, they were a painter, a paint salesman, and an insurance salesman, and a doctor, and a few other guys, an engineer, and with really nice smiles on their faces. But they absolutely knew what the mission was. There was no confusion on their part. And one man in particular, Jim, took me under his wing. And Jim saw something in me that I certainly had not seen in myself. And he spoke words into my life that were so deeply encouraging. And it just sort of unchained something inside of me. And what was happening is that I was being drawn by the gospel of Jesus into a relationship with him and a passion to live my life for him. I went to that church for all the right reasons. And they responded in a way that exemplified all of the right reasons. And so I'm here today, but my dad would never have been able to do this. Which is interesting because we have the same DNA, you see. And so what I've come to realize is that the difference was with the result that I've been able to get with my life and the result that my dad was able to get with his life, it has nothing to do with our DNA. It has to do with the DNA of the body of Christ. And it's different from church to church and from community to community, from small group to small group. We'll have some time for comments at the end. And if you want to do some Q&A, we can do that as well. YBL second half ministry is exactly what the world needs right now. Exactly what Birmingham needs right now. Because on the one hand, you have all of these young men driving up and down the streets while we're in here, having this great time, this great lunch together. You have all of these young men, thousands of them driving up and down the streets, and they're filled with all kinds of angst and disillusionments. They're dispirited. They're disheartened. They don't know why their lives are turning out the way they are turning out. They don't know how they're supposed to turn out. All they know is that they feel alone. They don't feel like God cares about them personally, not really. They don't feel like their life has a purpose. It feels random to them. They have these destructive behaviors that keep dragging them back down. Their souls feel dry. Their most important relationships are not healthy. And finally, they don't feel like they're doing anything that's going to make a difference to leave the world a better place. And they're out there right now. Right now. And you might be in that same position in one of those, you might identify with one of those too. You could be in here and feel that way too. And that's okay. Help's on the way, okay? But I'm guessing that the vast majority of us have at one point or another been through that phase of our life, and we have given our lives to Jesus, and we know that the only real hope for any of those men is Jesus Christ and His gospel. We know that. And so, YBL Second Half Ministry has such an incredible opportunity. Such an incredible opportunity. And the opportunity is this. The opportunity is to understand what's going on out there, to see what Jesus sees when He looks at these young men, to have the same kind of compassion on those young men that Jesus does, and to feel an ache to help them, an ache for the harvest. And the only way that that happens, my brothers, is when we get the gospel under our own skin. Once you get the gospel under your skin, you see what He sees, you feel what He feels, you want to do what He does, and you ache to make it happen. So I told you this story because I want you to, I could give you the statistics, right? But the statistics are abstract. I just wanted to share a story, a personal story about that illustrates the difference between doing discipleship and not doing discipleship. And my entire family lineage, 1926, what are we? I forget, was it 95 years? We're 95 years down the road, and my family line is still reeling from the decision that man made in 1926. We have still not fully recovered. And so there's a guy in your sphere of influence, right? Maybe in your neighborhood, I don't know. And he's a guy just like my dad. He wants to do the right thing. He wants to be a godly man, a godly husband, and a godly father. And what's going to determine whether he turns out to be like my dad, my grandfather, or me, it really is God. For some reason, God has chosen to put that into the hands of us, His disciples. And so, as you are contemplating how you are going to spend the rest of your second half, in the words of the famous Phil Reddick, if I can quote Phil Reddick, our men, they're not looking for a full-time job. They're not even really looking for a part-time job. They want to make a difference. They want to make an impact. But they also want to be able to enjoy some things that they haven't enjoyed before, time with their grandkids, maybe a trip with their wife, planning some family time. In the mix of all that, I don't even know if I can remember it. I just read it this morning. C.S. Lewis has said something. He said, Christianity makes the claim that all human beings live forever somewhere. he goes on to say, this would not be worth bothering about much. Oh, and he said, this is necessarily true or false. All people everywhere live forever somewhere. This is either true or false. He said that. And then he went on to say, this would not be worth much of a bother if our lives were only going to last 70 years or 80 years. But it's worth bothering a lot about if, in fact, we do live forever. So, we have the answer. We have the solution that all of the broken, dispirited people in this community, men and women, young and old, have. And we also now have maybe a little extra time to devote to that. And so what I would like to do is, on behalf of YBL Second F, is to encourage, challenge you to get involved with the mentoring programs that are being rolled out, and invest yourself in some young guy like me. Would somebody invest their life in some young guy like me? Would somebody invest their life in some guy like my dad? But would somebody pick up my granddad before he blows the whole deal? Or maybe help him reconcile that so that I don't have to stand up here and tell you this terrible story. I mean, it does have a happy ending, yeah. There has been an incredible, and I was able to lead my mother and my father to Jesus before they died, so I thank God for that. But the train wreck that my family has been through, it's just not fair. It's just not fair that there were men. It's just not fair that there were men. It's just not fair that there were men in my dad's church who were walking with God So I pray that God would give each of us just an ache to help some other men. I really do. I hope that He will. I hope that He will. All right, any comments, any questions, any clarifications? Yeah. Would you please maybe stand and speak loudly so everybody can hear?
I heard you say there were 4 questions that men want to know, but you never said what they were.
Yeah, so it's first question is, when a young man comes up there, why did he just do that? Number 2, what are the problems that he's trying to solve? Number 3, what does he need from us? And number 4, how can we give it to him? Yeah, got it, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes?
What way can the church disrupt men's perception of retirement? Which is very cool.
All right, can I be straightforward? He wants to know, how can the church disrupt men's view of retirement? I don't think this is going to work. I don't think browbeating, embarrassing, shaming, guilting, giving quotas, or asking too much are going to work. Okay? That's the easy answer, part of the answer, what won't work. Here's what I think might work. Give men an action that they can take, that they can visualize themselves succeeding at. It can be a small action. It doesn't have to be a big one. Take a guy, take one man to lunch or coffee, a meal or coffee, and ask him this question: where are you on your spiritual journey? So you can, one cup of coffee can change the world, or at least that guy's world, right? So something like that, a specific actionable step that the man can visualize himself doing. But then, so now he's got the step, but what inspires or motivates the man to take action on that? And I think it's this idea of, and here it is. I think that most men that don't serve because they don't have enough Jesus for themselves. And they're not confident. They haven't been equipped. They haven't been fully discipled themselves. They don't know what to do. And so there's a fear factor, I think. I think there's a fear factor for some, not for all. And the solution for the man who isn't like that, positively, is to first take care of your own soul, if you will. When Jesus went to the home of Martha and Mary, it said that Mary sat at the feet of Jesus listening to his words, his logos. Martha, on the other hand, was, it says in the scripture, was in the kitchen, distracted, drawn away from Jesus, literally drawn away, distracted by all the preparations, the diakonia, the service. So you got the logos, and Mary's over there doing that, and then you have the diakonia, which is where we get deacon and service and so forth. And then Martha was, upset with her sister. She goes to Jesus. She said, Master, I'm doing all this work over here, and Mary's over here hanging out with you. Tell my sister to come help me. Come tell my sister to come do the work. And so those of you who remember the story will remember that Jesus said, Martha, Martha, you are upset and worried about many things. But only one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen it, and it will not be taken from her. And so, if you don't have the gospel under your skin, if you're distracted with whatever you're doing, like Martha was distracted, then the answer for you would be, Mary first, there will be plenty of time for Martha. If you are the ministry, don't try to be the minister. Get yourself well. Get yourself whole. If for any reason, I have no reason to think that this would be true, but if somebody was sitting in your chair right now recoiling about this idea of helping someone else, then I would say, get well. You're not a well-model Christian. You are a sick model Christian. There, I said it. There are sick model Christians, and there are well-model Christians. And if you don't have the gospel under your skin, or you're not in the process of doing Mary and getting it under your skin, then you're not well-modeled or getting in that direction. And an example of being sick model, we talked about it this morning only briefly. I could talk about it for a long time. But there is this, over the last quarter of a century, there is this kind of ethos that you see in many Christian circles. And it's the problem of spiritual obesity. For a quarter of a century, we've had all of this incredible teaching, books, and I'm part of that, and great churches and mega churches and all these celebrities and so forth, and it's wonderful and to an extent. But the problem is, here's the problem, for some of us, we have been sitting there gorging on this beautiful food that's being presented, and we have become spiritual overeaters. And we have become spiritually obese. Most Christians today don't need more food. They need more exercise. So a lot more could be said about that. Positively, and then we'll move on to something else. Positively, you can do these things intentionally along the way on your own. I've had 3 Uber rides when I'm here. I know all 3 of their life stories, and I know, why they either are walking with God or why they don't want to walk with God. I know that. And those are just along the way. And so but I also think these organized ideas that where you'd have a more intentional strategy like YBL Second Half, I think this is a tremendous way to take men who really want to do the right thing. I mean, I'm guessing I can't imagine why you would come to this luncheon if you weren't in the deal. I mean, if you weren't one of those ones that want to do the right thing. I mean, if I was going to preach the negatives, I would go out on the street and do that, but not in here. I mean, you're the guys that want to get it done. And so I think participating in the mission of YBL Second Half, I can't think of a better way to do it. All right, that's my answer. Anybody else have a comment or a question? Actually, I see the time is exactly right to turn it back to David or Phil, one of you. Ben, thank you. It's been an honor to be with you. God bless.